Hello, folks, and welcome to the Good Wolf Pod. I'm your host, Jerica, coming to you with a very better late than never second episode. I hope you all had a great summer as we settle into fall. I will give you a quick update on why we did not do more episodes and why I'm alone yet again today. So, I have had the intention of doing a podcast for a long time now and was trying to convince my sister and almost anyone who would be interested in doing it with me, to co-host. And she was finally was interested. The thing is, she has 3 children and is a very dedicated, amazing mother. She is also starting a new career. So the practicality of nailing her down for, if an episode's even an hour, like it's almost a 3-hour commitment with setup and takes and whatnot. And it was just kind of impossible. It didn't work out. So, I hope that she'll jump in on some episodes from time to time. But we learned in the first episode that I can yap. I can yap and yap for, a full hour. So there's nothing wrong with doing that for a few episodes as I kind of get used to the sound, the editing, the setup, all that stuff. It was definitely a challenge on the first one. And then, I definitely have a lot of guests that I'd like to get on the show as well. So yeah, that's kind of the intent, is to get going on it a little bit. But obviously I have a son as well and a job, and this is kind of just a hobby project. But huge shout out to those of you who listened. I felt like it was like 4 people, but I know a few people listened to it and I really appreciate it. I even had one guy call and ask when the next episode was going to come out, because my number was definitely out there when I had the cafe. So some members of the public have got a hold of it, which is totally fine. I don't really have an issue with that, but I did take it off websites and Google and all the things. So hopefully it's not still out there. With not having a physical location, there's not really a need for it. But yeah, he called and showed his support one time before, and then called to see when the next episode was out. So this episode is dedicated to you, my friend. You gave me the motivation to get back on here and put together another episode. So I appreciate it. I hope you all had a good summer. We definitely had a great summer, my son and I. I definitely spent a lot of time by myself, which I really enjoyed. My son and I took a couple small trips up to visit family, and he was able to spend most of the summer with me, not having the cafe and not doing the trailer. Left me working from home, which worked out great because he hates going to daycare, and he's really independent and really easy to keep at home. I was able to get a lot of work done from home, and he just made crafts most of the summer in his room, and he started a YouTube channel and learned editing on CapCut. So he's probably got more subscribers than me, and yeah, it was awesome. He just spent a lot of time kind of doing creative things while I was working, and then we got to get out and do some fun stuff as well. So it was a really good summer. And yeah, other than that, a lot of time kind of spent by myself, just rollerblading the seawall, going for big long bike rides. Yeah, doing a lot of fun things. I went to my first rave. That was lots of fun. And the reason that I wanted to film this episode specifically today, I'll get this and give you a cheers. I was trying to open it to give you the sound, but I got interrupted. So this is take 2 or 3 or something. But yeah, cheers to a year without alcohol. Yeah, today is 1 year without alcohol for me. On September 14th last year, I went to a play with my mom, and it's an awesome production. I highly recommend if you get a chance to check it out. It is a Stage Door and Possibilities production. One of my mom's best friends puts on this play every year. She works with adults with developmental disabilities, and they work so hard to learn their scripts and to create incredible, like, it's themed every year. This year was like a Western theme. Like this, I just went like a week ago as well. The year before, I don't even remember what it was. I don't remember the theme, but we've been to a few. There's been like a steampunk theme, and they always have like different sets and whatnot. And it's just such an incredible production. I highly recommend. Anyways, the point of the story was that we went to Burgoo a restaurant in Vancouver just before the show. And I was kind of on a wanting to take a break from alcohol. And at this point in my life, like, the summer prior to, September 14th of last year when I had the last drink, it was not, I was not drinking with any frequency or severity where it was a concern. I was a very infrequent and kind of low consumption drinker. I was drinking like maybe once or twice a week, maybe 2 to 4 drinks roughly. I definitely have had seasons in my life where I've consumed more alcohol, like, when I turned 19 for sure, in my high school days, things like that. But at this point in my 30s, it was definitely not problematic in my opinion. It was very infrequent and lower consumption for sure. But I've taken breaks in the past. Like I've taken, obviously while pregnant with my son. And then the year after I had my son, I took like a whole year off after I had him. You can breastfeed and drink safely, but I just chose to take the break. I've also taken like a month off here or there, but I don't know. I had a couple friends who were encouraging me to do these kind of self-improvement journeys. So my friend Taylor has a breathwork business, and she does art and she has a charity, all these incredible things. I'm definitely going to get her on the podcast at some point. She's a busy gal. But, she was encouraging me to do some like self-guided work. And a lot of it was, implementing positive routines into my daily life. So waking up early, making my bed, spending a few minutes journaling, a few minutes reading, doing my daily movement, getting to the gym or doing a workout of some kind. And with all that, she was encouraging me to abstain from alcohol. So I kind of had the intention of taking a break just to respect the plan that she was putting me on. But there'd been a couple instances where I've kind of felt socially obligated to, have a drink with someone. So there was one time kind of the week before that I had gone out with a friend and had a drink, with that intention kind of lingering in my mind to not, but it happened anyways. And then I went to the play with my mom, and, she encouraged me to have a drink with her at the restaurant before the play. And I didn't want to be rude. We went out. It was our annual thing. So I had one. And after that, I just decided that, I needed to take a break. And I actually ended up getting sick as well, where I had to go on antibiotics for like a couple weeks. And so that kind of helped those first couple weeks to sort of have an excuse to abstain. So it started off with that, and it was never intended to be a full year or a lifetime or whatever. I don't know what it's going to be at this point, but it was just intended to be a break. And after the round of antibiotics was done and I was back to health and whatnot, I just had no desire to get back to it. So I just kind of continued. And my best friend Scully and his wife were married in a surprise wedding of sorts in September there, and I didn't have any drinks at the wedding, and I didn't have any drinks over Christmas, and all the social things that you think you're going to be missing out on without alcohol. And so, trigger warning, this whole episode is going to be about substances, just to be clear. So if alcohol or illicit substances or what have you is triggering to you, definitely skip this one. It's going to be basically the content of the entire episode. As I drink my non-alcoholic Guinness. It's not bad. It's all right. There's some great non-alcoholic beers these days, I will say. But yeah, I made it through all the social things and never really felt like I was missing out on anything. And one of the things that did help with that for me was microdosing mushrooms. So I have never consumed mushrooms in like a high quantity. I never had done them until basically that summer, I think it was. Friends of mine were using them for kind of mental health reasons, and I got some through them to try to help with anxiety and things like that. And that was kind of the buffer for me in social settings where other people were consuming alcohol. I kind of just was like, oh, I'll have my mushies or whatever. And it kind of like took a little bit of the social pressure off. And to me, it's the equivalent for in the doses that I take. It's so small. It's like 100 to like 250 milligrams, which is, like a quarter of what would be a dose of mushrooms. So it's kind of the equivalent of having a couple drinks sort of thing. And, it really does make me feel great. It wears off within, 2-3 ish hours, I would say 3-4 hours, whatever. There's no hangover. There's no, like, it's not like hallucinogenic in those quantities for me. And yeah, I found it to be great. I still have some. I just do it very infrequently, like maybe once a month or maybe once every couple months. It's kind of just like a one-off thing once in a while, but it is nice to have something for me. I think, and it really has helped continue my abstinence with alcohol, just to have a different option in social settings where everyone else is choosing to have something. It was kind of nice. You don't need it, absolutely, if you're thinking about taking a break from alcohol. Like, you can just choose to abstain, but that's my advice, is that it did kind of work for me. So yeah, to kind of further go into the topic of alcohol and substances and consumption, I definitely started drinking at a very early age. I started drinking pretty heavily around like 11 and 12 years old. Um, I had an older family member. I'm going to be cautious just about the way that I say things in this episode, out of respect for other people. So, substance use and addiction was definitely a theme within my family, more broadly speaking. Um, I've had different family members who have, struggled with alcoholism for a number of years. That was very challenging for me. I've had other family members who've struggled with like chronic marijuana addiction, which I know some people would kind of like laugh at, but it's very much a real thing, and it can impact your life. So in my experience, it was definitely impactful in my life. I've also had other family members who've gone into, more illicit substances, using methamphetamines and I don't know what they were using, to be honest. I think they went down the road ran the gamut basically of all of it. I think it was meth and crack and, I don't know, speed and heroin or fentanyl or wherever it landed, but ultimately it landed them in a psychiatric ward. And so to further the point about my experience with substances, I remember explicitly in fifth grade, we had a public speaking competition or whatever, where I was speaking in front of the school at 10 years old, and I had to pick a speech topic. And the topic that I ended up picking was schizophrenia. And the reason I picked that topic was my dad's brother, I knew, was schizophrenic. And I never met him. He passed when my dad was, I believe, 18 years old. And so my dad had just told me that, he was schizophrenic. So it was one of those things where you hear about and you don't really know what it means. And I'd seen, it in movie or television, and I didn't really understand it. So I did a speech on it. So I researched it, and I did a speech about it. And what I learned in doing that was that, using certain hallucinogenic or illicit substances could potentially trigger schizophrenia in people who might not otherwise become or develop schizophrenia. And I learned that schizophrenia is something that hits a lot of people in their early 20s. And that you can be predisposed to it. So I knew that having it in kind of my bloodline, having, my dad's brother had it, that there was a possibility that I could develop schizophrenia. And so for me, I started drinking very early, and I drank heavily in grade 7 and grade 8, like a lot. It was just a time where I wasn't getting a lot of supervision because I was spending time at another family member's house, and they were struggling with addiction. And I had, older family members that I spent time with that were already experimenting with things. And yeah, it just ended up being, I don't know, an escape or a fun thing at the time, or it seemed like a fun thing. But boy, did we put ourselves in some deeply unsafe positions. And it blows my mind now as a mother to think that my son is 8 years old. I could not imagine, in 3 or 4 years for him to be drinking in like in the quantities and the frequencies or at all that I was. Like he shouldn't be drinking at all at that age. And it's just crazy now to think about that, you know, that's where I was at that time, and to think of the things that I was doing, you know. We were hanging out in the dark at schools, lighting fires, and like not lighting the school on fire, but like lighting little bonfires for us to keep warm or to hang out, and getting cops called and going to parties. And like I was hanging out with people that were, I don't know, 7, almost 10 years older than me no, I guess they weren't 20. Well, I don't know, maybe. But yeah, so it was just a wild time, and it actually got progressively safer and less concerning as I got older, I would say. Um, and the thing is, that knowledge for me, that education, that knowledge about schizophrenia and about the harms that could come with certain things kept me from experimenting in ways that my peers chose to. So I did smoke marijuana. I tried marijuana. Pot's not for me, and we're going to get into that in a minute. But I tried it a few times. I had some knowledge that certain family members were consuming marijuana, and I was very hurt by it because at 12 you don't understand, and it seems like the end of the world. So in an act of rebellion, I went out and consumed some myself. And I don't think I know how to smoke it. I don't like smoking it. It doesn't work very well for me. It just burns my throat a lot. Not much goes on. I don't know. It's never really been my thing. I've tried joints and bongs. Look, I don't even know the words. It's so sad. It's not for me, and I have no judgment towards anyone who enjoys it. It just never really worked. But later in life, so when they legalized marijuana a couple years ago, I had a friend through work that made some cookies, and I was with a partner at the time, and we had a conversation about them at another person's house. And when we came home, he mentioned to me, I had a cookie, or I ate a cookie or something. And the first thought that I had in my head was like, do we have Oreos? Because I don't know why I just didn't put two and two together. I didn't get it. And then later, after I put my son to bed, I came downstairs, and, you know, he's like, oh, I think my cookie's kicking in. And I'm like, what? And I'm like, oh, you had that kind of cookie. Like, I wish you had it with me. And then I thought, okay, well, whatever. Tonight's his night. I'll have mine another night. And like a normal person, he just, you know, laughed and went to bed. Like, it was not a big deal. He just had a little laugh and went to bed, and it was no big deal. The next day, I decided to have my cookie. Within 15 minutes, I decide to go wash my makeup off because I am like, I can feel this kicking in, and I don't want to be a messy face. I don't want to have mascara everywhere. I'm going to wash my makeup off. So I wash and I remember distinctly like looking at the mirror, no, like seeing this is happening. This is going down right now. And so I go out into the hallway, and I look at him and I say, I think my cookie's kicking in. And he goes, it's only been like 15 minutes. It's a placebo effect. You're fine. And I look at him and I go, you're in for a fucking ride. And I melt into a puddle of laughter that turns into tears on the ground. And I immediately freak out, and I phone my sister, and I'm like, I just had a cookie and I'm not doing well, and I need you to come pick me up. I'm not okay. And she's like, okay, I'm coming. And I go outside, and I'm literally in my pajamas. I'm in my fuzzy pink slippers, and like I had this pink sweatshirt and these fuzzy purple pajamas. And I'm standing outside, and I phone another family member who is a regular consumer of marijuana. And I say, oh my God, I just had a cookie and I am not doing well. How do you deal with this? Like, I'm not okay. How do I fix this? And they go, oh, honey, edibles are too hardcore for me. You're just going to have to ride it out. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, I was not in a good way. So my sister picked me up and drove me around for probably all of 45 minutes. It felt like 4 hours. It felt like a lifetime. I don't know how to describe to you. I have these videos, and I've posted them on my TikTok because I have no shame about this. Who cares? It was legal. I tried it. It did not go well for me. But it wasn't the first and last time that I learned this lesson. And this time is funny because, we drove around for a little bit. It wore off. I made some funny videos. We grabbed some McDonald's, came home. I was still sketched out by the time I got home, but I slept in the spare room. I hid my keys in a drawer, all kinds of weird stuff. And I went to bed. And, by the next day I was fine. So no big deal. It was done responsibly. There was it's fine. However, fast forward a couple years or whatever, I've now in the last, just call it 3 years since now, I've gone out a couple times and grabbed gummies to just have like maybe 2 or 3 times a year. I would get like a 5 or 10 milligram gummy and hang out by myself at home and just like watch comedy and have a gummy. And all the times it went great. Like every time it was perfect. I just had a laugh. I went to bed. I was normal for once. This is until about 6 months ago. So this is all tying back into the speech about schizophrenia, because as we know, you can trigger certain things, and certain people are predisposed to, psychotic episodes or concerns of the mind. I don't know what you want to call it. There should be a precursor in all these episodes to say that I'm not well educated in anything that I'm going to talk about. I'm going to speak solely based on experience. I never finished my degree. I'm not coming from the place of a professor or a peer researched or whatever. Yeah, I'm just telling you, peer reviewed is what I meant. Sorry. I'm just telling you my experiences, and you delineate from them whatever you can. And yeah, and I'm willing to take feedback as well, because I'm going to share opinions and stuff too that I'm sure is going to anger a lot of people. But I digress. So, everything was good consuming marijuana here and there, like so infrequently, just because it's not really my thing. But it's funny sometimes, like it's hilarious to watch a stand-up comedy show and have a little gummy and have a laugh. Like, it's a good time until it's not a good time. So about 6 months ago, I decided to do just this. In the week leading up to this, because as you know from the last episode, if you listen to the last episode, I had a lot of changes go on, right? I had to close a business unexpectedly. I tried to open another one. That didn't go well. I had another business fall through. Like, I went through a breakup. I moved again. Like, so many things had gone on in the 6 months prior to this time that I'm telling you about. And I was starting to, I take everything in stride as it happens, but I think because I just kind of bury it, it ends up sort of bottling up. And then, that stress starts to come out. And at that time I had been telling a couple people in my life, I'm feeling really stressed. And, I'm not drinking. So I'm not going to just, not to say that when you're feeling stressed, you should drink, to be clear. But, sometimes that was a thing for me. Don't get me wrong, not to booze it up hard, but to have, go pick up a 4-pack of craft beer and sit at my house and have some snacks and watch a show and just relax for a night was, maybe not the healthiest, but relatively healthy. But at this time, I'm, choosing to stay sober from alcohol. And so that was not a choice for me. So I am like, okay, whatever. I'll do a gummy then. I'm going to go to the store. I'm going to get a gummy, and I'm going to put on some, stand up, and I'm going to have a chill night by myself, and I'm going to try to process these emotions, the stress, whatever, work through it. And yeah, that was kind of the plan. And in and amidst all of this, to be clear, like I'm doing other things to take care of myself. This isn't the sole thing that I expect is going to relieve stress in my life. I'm talking to friends. I'm working out regularly. I'm getting sleep. Like, I'm doing self-care things. But, in this particular night, I'm like, I need to take a load off, basically, right? So I walk over to the store where, the government approved products are sold. And I say to the lady, I think I asked for 2 products. I asked for something to help me sleep, and I asked for something that would be like for a night to have a giggle, right? And so I think the week prior, I had taken the sleep ones, and they were like 2.5 milligrams with like whatever the mix was, had a lot of CBD or whatever. I don't know enough about it, but those had been fine. Those like had almost no effect. They were so low. So then the night comes where I'm like, okay, now I'm going to have this night to myself, and I'm going to consume this other one. And I consume this gummy. And when I tell you, it went so bad, so bad. I I was watching comedy, and all of a sudden everything goes black. I went to the bathroom, and it felt like my face was melting. Like it felt like there was acid in my brain. I don't know how to explain it. I felt so scared, and I had a flood of traumatic childhood situations. I don't even know if all of them are true or untrue. I don't want to get into that. Oh my Lanta, I had just the worst experience ever. I felt unsafe in my home, in my body. I felt terrified. I immediately felt like I was schizophrenic. I felt like I was in a psychotic break, and I felt terrified that it wasn't going to end. And I panicked and once again phoned my sister. God bless her. God bless her. I'm not religious, but whatever your God may be, make it bless her. Um, I phone her and I'm like, you need to pick me up. I'm not okay. It gets so much worse than this, though. As she's coming, I can't even get off the phone because I'm so scared to be alone. I'm so scared to not have someone to listen or whatever. I don't know. I was not in a good way. So she comes, and she is like, you're okay, you're okay. She's trying to talk me down, but my heart is pounding. Like my heart is racing so fast, and I'm like panicking, and I'm telling her like, I need to go to the hospital. I'm not okay. I need to go to the hospital. And obviously she's like, this is silliness. You've eaten a legal gummy from the store. Like you don't need to go to the hospital. Well, I'm like, in thank goodness for the things that I do know. I say, please call 811. Like, if you don't want to call 911 and get me an ambulance, call the nurses hotline, please. I do not feel okay. So she calls the nurses hotline, and I explained to the lady like, hey, I took this gummy. It's literally giving me anxiety just talking about it because I feel like I feel back at that night, and it was so awful. um Anyways, tell the lady, and she's like, okay, is she breathing regularly? And my sister's like, no. And I'm like, no, I feel really panicked. She's like, is your heart beating normally? I'm like, no, it's racing really fast. Like I'm not feeling good. And she's like, okay, do you have aspirin in the house? And right when she said that, like I knew what she was saying, and I said, no, I have like acetaminophen and naproxen. Like I have alternate pain medication, like over the counter normal stuff, but not aspirin. And she was asking about the aspirin because she was concerned that I was going to have a heart attack, because the state of panic that I was in, and how much I didn't, it was a 10 milligram gummy. Like it was not a lot of THC, but it was just the reaction that was causing in me was concerning, like deeply concerning to her. So she told my sister, you need to hang up the phone and you need to call 911 and you need to get her to the hospital. So my sister hung up the phone and called the ambulance, and they showed up. And I think they were also reluctant to take me, but I, kind of advocated that I did not want to be home alone, and like I needed to go. And in the back of the ambulance, I spoke to the paramedic about, some of the trauma or whatever that had surfaced for me. And I think she understood a little bit more where I was coming from at that point, because it wasn't just about a state of panic. It was about like so much more than that. And so we went to the hospital, and while I was waiting to be admitted, I separated myself into like basically a padded room and just stayed away from people because I just didn't want to be near anyone. I was just so out of it and so not okay. And I guess they took vitals, and they took, I don't know, blood or whatever they did. I don't remember everything that they did. um I think I went for like a cat. I don't even know. I'm having weird flashbacks. I might have even gone downstairs and like gone for like a CAT scan or something. I vaguely remember that, but yeah, I don't know. Anyways, I slept next to the nurse's station. Slept is the wrong word, really. I laid in a bed next to the nurse's station, getting a little bit of sleep here or there. And I was told I would see a psychologist or a psychiatrist in the morning, which is what I wanted to do, because I was telling them, like, I'm terrified that this isn't going to end. And I'm also really concerned as to why my brain does this. Like, why can other people handle this? Why is my brain so fragile and unable to handle any substances in any amount? Like, this is crazy. Like, obviously alcohol has never done this to me, or I wouldn't be, just taking a break from drinking. I would be abstaining from it entirely. But yeah, it was just such a horrific experience, and I don't understand why. I do and I don't. I think I needed a medical professional to tell me, yes, if you have a predisposition to these types of mental health conditions and you're consuming these substances, then there is a likelihood of these things happening. And I wanted to know there's a likelihood of it, being permanent, right? So I waited. I try to get some sleep, and in the morning, the psychiatrist or psychologist is supposed to see me. um no one comes. By 6 o'clock, I'm up and I'm working from my phone, sitting in the hospital bed, but I'm determined to see the psychologist because I know if I don't see them now, it's going to be impossible for me to see one. The job that I work is like a contract job. I don't have medical. Like, this is really the easiest and the best way to go about it, so I'm really keen on getting it done. And she doesn't come, and they tell me she's going to come by 7, and she's going to come by 8, and she's going to come by noon. And finally, by noon, I was like, I have to go. Like, I'm sorry, but I have a huge event coming up for work. I need to attend to, things that I cannot do from a hospital bed. I have to go. So unfortunately, I checked myself out, and that's a difficult situation to to be wanting and advocating and asking for help and not to get it, especially in like a hospital emergency situation. Like, I don't know. I feel for people that have had it so much worse than me and still haven't received that help. You know what I mean? Because obviously I'm fortunate enough to have support around me, and that, I don't know, I have the ability to just abstain from that and not put myself in that situation again. But I can't imagine if I was using a substance or in a circumstance. Sorry, my cat's going to interrupt us here. In a circumstance where I wasn't able to abstain from a substance that was causing that kind of chaos in my life, and I couldn't receive the help that I wanted and needed. So after that, I did do a follow-up appointment. I phoned like the mental health access clinic, or I think it's substance use and mental health access clinic. And I got put through to like the rapid access clinic, and I had to wait, I think, 2 weeks for an appointment. And I did go see a psychologist, and I talked to her about it, and she just kind of confirmed that, yeah, it's obviously not for you, and you would benefit from some counseling. And that was pretty much it. Like, she didn't want to go forward with any, like, she wasn't concerned about any diagnoses of anything. She knows that I have anxiety, and she suggested that I likely have ADHD, but said that she wasn't doesn't diagnose for that or whatever. But basically, it was just confirmed that, like, yeah, this obviously is not for you, and it might go this way every time you do it. So that's the end of marijuana for me. That's for certain. And you might be concerned about the microdosing thing. Listening to that, it's never been that way for me. It's in such low quantities that I don't think it's like that. But I mean, I'm very cognizant and aware of the possibilities, and will definitely be keeping an eye on that. But yeah, I think just that knowledge that I had as a child, that I gained for myself about some of the dangers. I don't think a lot of people know about that. And when I tell this story about my experience with marijuana, I never hear that talked about. You know what I mean? And I don't think it's actually that uncommon. Like, edibles are, a lot of people use edibles to go to sleep every night, things like that. And yet I've never really heard people talk about episodes of like psychosis, or like, you know what I mean, panic, or what have you. I don't hear people talking about it. And it's interesting because, like, I don't think it's entirely uncommon. And I think people assume that, like, drug-induced schizophrenia or drug-induced psychosis or psychotic episodes only happen with, methamphetamines or more illicit or more, harder substances, if you will. But I don't think that's entirely the case. I think lots of people probably have experienced what I've experienced. Maybe they just don't want to share it, or maybe I'm entirely rare. I don't know. But I did want to share that story, just kind of as a word of caution, if you will, so that if you are someone that, is mentally fragile, if you will, I guess that's what I am, maybe it's not for you. But yeah, so back to kind of the full story of it. So yeah, drinking and whatnot was definitely a part of my high school experience. But as my friends started to experiment with things like ecstasy, was really the popular thing in my age group in high school. And I remember going on party buses. We had hall parties and party buses. Those were like the big things. And a lot of a lot of my friends would consume ecstasy, and it was just something that I chose to never touch because of the knowledge that I had and what I knew. And I wonder if there's an element of them not ever receiving that education, because I sought that information out myself. And this is why I believe like education is so important. Like it's not the dare program, it's not the never do drugs and drugs are bad and whatnot. It's the this is what this drug is and this is what it does and this is what could potentially happen, and you know what I mean, this is how to consume it safely and whatever, right? Like it's that piece of education where people can know and understand the risks and know and understand the potential rewards, if you will, and really be well informed to make those decisions with all of the information available, right? Because I was fortunate enough to have sought that information out. God forbid I took ecstasy or high doses of mushrooms or I don't know what, like whatever, if I had taken something at that age, like I could very well be fully schizophrenic, living a very different life right now, right? And this is no disrespect to folks with schizophrenia. That's not at all where I'm going with it. I'm just saying that if you were aware of, I'm sure there's challenges in living with it, and that if you could not induce it or not put yourself into a several month long psychotic episode or something, obviously I'm just trying to give people that information to kind of make that choice, right? But yeah, so that was kind of my experience. And then as we went into our grade 12 year, we did have someone. I went to a party up this back road in the kind of far back corner of the town that I live in, and I saw this kid at a party. I'm not going to say his name just out of respect for it. I know everyone knows the story, and if you're listening and you're there or what have you, my thoughts are with you, because it was tough. It was tough for all of us. I didn't know him well, but I did see him that night, and he left the party and he got into a car accident, and he had 3 or 5 other people in the car, and he passed and no one else did. And that hit our class really hard, and that was really tough, and that was a substance related passing. And then in the year after I graduated, a year or two after, we lost another couple girls from my grad class to substance related deaths. And it was something that was really uncommon at the time, in the sense, like, there was a couple, and it was all kind of like ecstasy and cocaine sort of thing. This is well before the fentanyl crisis. I'm 33 years old, so we're not in the time of naloxone, and we're not in the time of deaths in the tens of thousands in the province. But it was it was shocking, and it was a reality check and whatnot. And I think for me, I was past the point of ever considering consuming anything aside from alcohol and marijuana, really. I'm surprised that in my 30s I decided to even microdose mushrooms, but I do believe that they have great health benefits, and I'm for that. But yeah, I knew from that age, like, I didn't need any more reality checks to convince me not to go try cocaine or ketamine or whatever anybody else is getting into. I was far past that. I kind of made the decision at 10, and it stuck with me up until this point, right? So that was really just more of a tragedy. And then yeah, heading into my adult years, I think it was, I don't know if it was the first year I'd started in the jail, or it was the year before. I think it might have been the year before, because I had moved out of my mom's house by the time I started working in the jail, and I think I was still living with my mom when this happened. So we had an extended family member. Again, I'm going to preserve their anonymity out of respect for them, but yeah, we had an extended family member who started coming around telling us that people were filming them, and that they were, yelling at them from places on the street, and that they were watching them. And long story short, we were very naive to things in the beginning, because we weren't aware that they were consuming, pretty serious substances. So we, in the beginning, were trying to listen to these recordings and trying to support and trying to kind of understand where they were coming from, until we realized that none of this was happening and that they were in fact consuming these substances and were likely in a drug-induced state of schizophrenia or psychosis. So we ended up, this was just before Christmas, I don't even know what year this was, like probably like 2010. We ended up having to admit them to the psych ward at the Maple Ridge Hospital, and watch them go through the process of trying to get back in touch with reality. And that's probably one of the most difficult things, to experience, is watching someone who is so out of touch with reality, watching someone that you love, specifically watching anyone, though honestly it's not easy for me, no matter who it is, to see someone who is so out of touch with reality, and no matter what you say to try to convince them or try to make them understand that they're living kind of outside the realm that the rest of us are in, they just cannot be convinced. And watching them slowly kind of trickle back to a place of real existence is a difficult process. I'm grateful that they were able to get the help that they needed at that time. Unfortunately, it didn't really stick, and I've kind of lost touch with them at this point, and I don't know whether they're around or not. Uh, we offered as much help as we could at the time, for as long as we could, and unfortunately, it just wasn't enough. Or I don't know. I don't know. But that was one experience, and then there was another family member shortly after I started in the jail. Now, the jail itself brought another level of awareness to substance use, and watching people, come in whatever state, right? Like, a lot of people are detoxing when they get into jail. And it's that painful process of either getting to stabilize on, an opioid agonist therapy like methadone or Suboxone, or going through a horrible detox. And, can you imagine being in the worst state of your life, where you're, you know, convicted and awaiting trial, or not convicted, sorry, charged and awaiting trial on, crimes, and you are also suffering with sickness because you have been using substances on the street, and now you're without them, or hopefully you're without them. Sometimes they were not, but so I think it brought another level of awareness. But in the beginning, it was really like a surface level of awareness, because it was not something that I was talking to inmates about. It was something that I was witnessing. I was witnessing them dope sick. I was witnessing them, sometimes doing frisks and finding substances, or sometimes witnessing them, clearly high or clearly drunk, or usually high, but on different substances or whatever. And you can see, like, the grip it has on some people's lives, and the impact or whatever. And even from reading the charges, you can see how impactful, the pursuit of those substances, or this trying to sell those substances or whatever, like, it really, sometimes some of their lives really revolve entirely around them. So that kind of brought another level of awareness. And then in my personal life, simultaneously, some other family members were really struggling with alcohol, to the point where, one of them again was hospitalized, more for, I don't know what the chemical or the medical term was, but basically their liver was no longer filtering out the alcohol. So the alcohol was basically poisoning their brain. So they were as well going into a state of kind of psychosis, or just an unwell mental state. They were not themselves. They were they were not in control of their body, or of their thoughts, or their actions or behaviors anymore. It was deeply concerning. And after being hospitalized, it was made aware that they were consuming alcohol in the excess of, beyond what any of us were aware of. And they were able to stabilize and get better, and abstain from alcohol, and still have abstained from alcohol to this day. I think it's kind of at a point where, if they were to consume any more alcohol, they would not be around for very long because their body just doesn't have the capability to kind of filter it out the way it used to, right? So that was one thing that was going on that was a challenge for sure. And but their partner continued to consume alcohol for years after that incident, which obviously makes it very challenging when one person in the relationship is choosing to consume while the other person is abstaining. And their own journey got carried away. For now, this is going back like a few years. This is well into my journey with corrections and maybe out the other side. But yeah, they kind of continued. But I'm very proud to say that they have now found abstinence and they are doing extremely well. And the biggest piece of advice that I would give to folks who have family members that are struggling with these things, I don't even know if I say never stop trying, because nothing I did ever convinced anyone to stop, to be clear. Like, the only person that I can take credit for convincing was one inmate that I work with. He wrote me a letter to say that, he had stopped consuming. He was not doing heroin anymore because of my support. So that meant a lot to me. But in my own personal life and with my family, there was nothing I could say to convince those folks to stop. And it didn't matter if it was alcohol or, harder substances or marijuana or what. They could not be convinced to stop, no matter how much of an impact it had on my life or anyone else's life, or how much, sorry, the cat's getting carried away, or how much it was. There we go. He can just join and then he can relax. So there was no level of convincing anyone to stop consuming substances that ever worked. It was ultimately everyone has either made the decision on their own or has continued to use. So I don't know if the right answer is to say to hold on and to keep trying, because I can't say that worked. But I would say don't let it consume you, I suppose, and set boundaries and keep your distance because at the end of the day, like, likely, depending on the proximity that these people have to you in your life, it's probably having a huge impact on you and on your wellness and your well-being. And I would say, my biggest advice is to hold your boundaries when it's becoming too much, right? Because I definitely had situations where it was like, I'm probably not going to visit this family member anymore, or I can't help anymore because there's nothing I'm doing is helping, and it's just time to take a step back and kind of let them be on their own journey, and because I have to take care of myself. But ultimately, on the other side of things, for me, when people have chosen to take kind of a path of sobriety or abstinence, because sobriety, I'm sure, is more all entirely sober from everything, and not everybody's journey is that. Sometimes it's just doing away with a substance that's doing them harm, right? But whatever the case, when they found abstinence from the problematic substance, I'm pretty quick to forgive and just focus on building that relationship, because I'm not going to miss out on time with someone who I love, who is meaningful to me, when they're in a good way. I'm not going to hold resentment towards the years that they spent not in a good way, because that's the past. And I can have conversations if I need to process those emotions to let them know how I felt. But honestly, like, for the most part, I don't really see the need for it. Like, in my experience, most people know the harm that they've done to some extent, and we're usually the hardest on ourselves, and we feel the most amount of guilt for the things that we've done that we know was not the best version of ourselves. So I think there's no point in playing the blame game and saying, what about all those years that you did this and you did that? I think it's easier to just put the pointing finger down and open your arms up for a hug, as cheesy as that is, right? Like, honestly, I've had such an amazing time rebuilding the relationships with people who had been consumed by the substances they consumed for many years, right? And now I get the joy of not only enjoying their company for myself, but also in like having my son around them and watching them build that bond with my son. And that's, to me, is the best part. And if you have a family or a loved one who's struggling, I really hope you can get to that part and that you can enjoy it. You know what I mean? That you can let go of whatever resentments you're feeling and really just focus on the good. And we know that there is a chance that relapses can happen, and that's just a part of life. And if you can let it go and you can just say, like, just enjoy it for what it is when it is. And if that bump in the road comes, or things go downhill or things go sideways, you know, it's going to suck. It's going to suck. It's like breakups, right? Like in every relationship we enter, what is it? Like the chances of the relationship ending is like, what, 100%? I don't know, 90%. It's just high, probably, right? But we still enter it with the best of intentions to spend time with a person and enjoy them, for who they are, and spend that time together and make those memories together. And you're not going to enter into it saying, well, this isn't worth my time because this could end, right? And that's the same thing with periods of sobriety or periods of abstinence. We know that there is a chance that a relapse could happen, but at the end of the day, this person's here with you now. They're showing up in the best way that they can. And, you get the privilege of spending time with them and enjoying them as the best version of themselves. So soak it up and love it up. And if it goes south, cross that bridge when you come to it, right? And then once again, put those boundaries in place as needed. So yeah, that's a little bit that I wanted to share. I took a little bit of notes. Look at how organized I am, guys. So another piece that I wanted to talk about, in terms of the jail and in terms of my experience. So as mentioned, hold on, let's take a sip of this non-alcoholic Guinness. Oh, so good. Almost warm. Yeah, so one of the big things in the jail in that experience that I noticed. So in the beginning, like I said, I was really more of in an enforcement role. If you listen to the last episode, you kind of heard the journey of that career for me. So in the beginning, it was more like the observation of how these substances really consumed people's lives in different ways. But as I fell into the role of case management and into the role of programming, then I got to have some deeper insight into things, because then my role was more talking to people about their history with substances, teaching substance, I think it was called substance use management or substance abuse. It was in inappropriate language nowadays, but the language is always changing in terms of what's appropriate and what's not for that. But yeah, so I taught some courses, and I talked to people about their history and things like that. And then you start to get a deeper look, and you start to get a deeper understanding of how people end up in this position. And I think now, working in a nonprofit where, I hand out harm reduction supplies and I work with people in lived and living experience, I really see the stigma that people have towards people who use substances. I see people, that think the problem is so far away and it's so impossible to ever happen to them, and it's so those people, not me. And it's funny, because when you actually listen to the stories and you hear and you start to put together the themes, there's a lot of themes that I think people would be surprised about in terms of how people started using substances. And one of the most common themes that I found was a prescription. So a lot of people that I spoke to had been in either a work accident or a car accident or a sports accident of some kind, where they sustained an injury which left them in pain, and then they received a prescription from a doctor for a pain medication that was usually an opioid, right? They were prescribed oxys or hydromorphones or what have you. And, once they start using the medication, obviously the medication, they're going to build a tolerance to it. So they're going to need to, maybe re-up the medication or up the dosage or what have you. And eventually they'll usually get cut off the medication. Typically they'll then be seen as drug seeking or what have you. They'll be labeled as drug seeking, they'll be cut off the medication. And what does that lead them to is obviously illicit substances, going to look for these substances on the street. And that storyline was so common. Like, honestly, I don't know what percentage, obviously I didn't study this in depth, but very, very common for folks to get involved with that, right? Obviously, there's other situations where people just started out maybe partying and the partying went too long or got to this or whatever. A lot of trauma as well. Like, so many people were experiencing trauma and using substances to cope. So yeah, I just wanted to touch on that a little bit, because I think, the medical industry is seen as, I don't know, is seen in different ways. Maybe not maybe is not seen in the best light in this country. I know a lot of people have issues with how, the medical coverage is in Canada, but I I was surprised to hear how often that story was told and how many people experienced, their start with substances as a result of a prescription. It was pretty alarming to me. And it's not to say that, like, we shouldn't be prescribing these medications, because a lot of people do need them for pain. But obviously, some work needs to be done, some research, some diving into that needs to be done to figure out a better solution or a better way, right? Um, so then, leading into this job and leading into handing out harm reduction, and so we do outreach and we hand out basically drug paraphernalia is what it is. It's pipes, it's needles, it's all the things that folks who choose to use substances need to do so safely. And I will say that years ago, I probably did not have the mindset where I believed in that, right? Because on a surface level, you hear that and you think that's crazy. Like, why? Well, realistically, the why is because we are in a crisis and there is toxic drugs that were not around 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And so today, people who are choosing to use substances recreationally or infrequently or frequently are purchasing a substance that they think is one thing, and they are getting something completely different. And then beyond that, that can cause an overdose and that can cause a death. But if it doesn't, it can also cause an addiction to a substance that they didn't intend to use. So the problems here are super layered. And once again, just a reminder that, like, surface level of education on this, right? I'm touching on what I know from my experiences. There is so much more research and so much more information to find about this. And I encourage you to do that if it's something that interests you. But what I did want to talk about was just, we'll go to one thing from last week. So last week I decided to go to this conservative function. It was a conservative drug forum in my town. The local MP was hosting a conservative drug forum to speak about the toxic drug crisis. And politics is a sticky place for me because I don't like any of it. I do not like the conservatives. I do not like the liberals. I do not like any of it. I think most politics, most politicians are, I don't even know. I don't even want to get into my opinions of it. I will say that I read the conservative platform in depth, and morally it doesn't sit right with me, so that is not an option for me. However, I will say the liberals have not been doing well on it either. I love the focus on harm reduction, but I think there has not been a equal and necessary focus on treatment and recovery, because it's great to hand out harm reduction, but if the folks who are, choosing to or wanting to explore sobriety are not allowed access to do so, if they're having to sit on 3-month wait lists or wait 3 weeks to get into detox, that window of motivation is very small when you choose to, get sober. And if those services are not available in a timely manner, that window is going to close, and when it closes, you might not make it out the other side, type of thing, right? So yeah, so I end up going to this conservative thing mostly just to be a shit disturber, to put it politely. No, I went for research for my job, and to see what rhetoric they were pushing and whatnot. And so it started off with this lady speaking about using a lot of incorrect language about, substances and this and that, and calling people addicts and all the impolite things that conservatives do. And then they introduced some speakers. And the first speaker that came up was actually someone that I knew quite well. And her son passed away 2 years ago, and I also knew him quite well. And so I think that was emotionally jarring for me, because obviously I was going into this unaware of who the speakers were. And, it's it was obviously heartbreaking to hear her speak about the passing of her son. He was, a really good person, and they went through hell, and I just feel terrible about it. But so she spoke about that, and it was 2 years ago. And then the next lady got up, and that lady shared a story of how she was using substances more than 30 years ago, because she said she's got 30 years of sobriety. So she was using substances more than 30 years ago. And oddly enough, she called them methamphetamines and crack cocaine, which I've never heard someone who used substances use those terms. But however, she spoke about her time using substances. And the first thing she said, actually, when she got up to the mic, was that she had phoned the MP's office to complain about the addicts on the street receiving drug paraphernalia. So she was complaining about me, because it's me who's handing out drug paraphernalia. It's harm reduction supplies. We do it through our organization. We get them from the health unit. And the reason that they are vital and the reason that they save lives is because there are toxic drugs circulating. And so if you are choosing to use your methamphetamines and you use a pipe that someone else has smoked fentanyl in, you could overdose and die, because cross contamination, you only need a tiny hint of fentanyl. If you have no tolerance to it, you will overdose from it, right? Like the smallest amount. And now they have carfentanil, and they have, benzodiazepines, and all these different things that, are cross contaminated in different substances that cause different types of overdoses and, adverse responses. And that is the point of harm reduction, is to keep cross contamination from happening, to keep people safe, to keep infections from happening. If you're using dirty needles, and I will tell you right now, there's like 2 people in town that will take safe injection kits. Basically, it is very few and far between. The most popular mode of consumption is smoking, by far, in this province and by far in this town. So the concept of these dirty needles being everywhere is pretty inaccurate. We also give out disposal containers, so they have a safe place to dispose of their needles. So I will say that the needles that are most commonly give out are naloxone needles, which are to reverse an overdose. We do give out naloxone kits, and those needles you fill with the ampules to reverse an overdose, right? So that's harm reduction, naloxone. Harm reduction is, clean paraphernalia to be able to consume your substances safely and to not cross-contaminate and to not, get infections and all that. But harm reduction is also wearing a bike when you're riding don't wear your bike. Wearing a bike helmet when you're riding your bike to keep yourself safe, right? It's anything that reduces harm, like a seatbelt and so on. If you've ever heard anyone talk about harm reduction, you've heard these analogies, right? It's all the things we do to reduce harm in our lives. But, the first thing she says when she gets on stage is that she was mad about these, addicts being given drug paraphernalia. And so I listened to her speech about her addiction that she went through 30 years ago, and how she went to a 1-year treatment facility and she got clean, and treatment's the answer and treatment this. And then they had 4 different treatment centers, recovery centers, meeting sites, what have you, speak. And all of them were 12 steps. They were all different types of AA and 12-step programs. And no shade to the AA. I know there is millions and billions of people worldwide that do it, but it is not a one-size-fits-all solution. I've always said that there needs to be more options. The whole higher power thing, it doesn't work for everyone. I have a huge adversity to religion because of my experiences growing up. And so for me, I could not speak to a higher power. I would know what it meant and what it was intended to mean. And I don't care if you tell me it can be a chair or this or that. It's not for me. I told you earlier in this podcast that it was going to piss a lot of people off. So mark my words that I was not joking, because we're hitting all the angles, and I'm sure we're going to anger a lot of people. But that's okay. It's just me yapping, and you don't have to take it seriously. If you don't like it, don't listen. Leave a comment and get mad at me. I don't really care, man. I'm just about shouting out whatever comes into this little brain. So anyways, I listened to her tell her speech, And then I listened to these recovery centers get up, and most of them condemned harm reduction as well. Most of them had an opinion of, not believing in harm reduction, which I think is really funny to hear people in recovery talk about. And I hear it a lot, honestly. I hear it a lot, people in recovery condemning harm reduction, which there's two pieces to that. There's the timeline, which I'm going to get into in the next thing I say. And there's also the stigma and the, I don't know. I think it's now I'm up here, so now I'm going to look down on you because you're down here. Like, I just really don't like that mindset. You know what I mean? I think that there should be more acceptance, and there should be more understanding of where people are at, and understanding that without those life-saving measures, they may never make it to where you are, right? Because you've got your 3 years of clean time or this or that, but without harm reduction supplies, they might not get to ever start their journey, right? And that's the point, is giving them those tools so that if and when the motivation strikes to, move towards sobriety or to abstain from the substance that, is harming their lives or is causing them harm, if it has started to impact them negatively, and they want, to go about fixing that, then they can do that, right? Because now they've stayed alive long enough to get to that point where they can explore the next steps, right? And I think it's important, like I'm trying to be really careful, I don't know if you can hear it, but things like clean time is not, that implies that you're dirty if you're using substances, right? Which isn't really polite. Things like addict, like we don't say that, right? Obviously we don't say junkie. Like, language does matter when we, and I'm not perfect, and I definitely use, but it's about trying, right? It's about doing better and trying. So anyways, I listened to all these people, and all of them are basically, because it's a conservative function, so they're all condemning harm reduction, and they're all pushing treatment. And that's basically this MP's message, is that we're going to bring your kids home drug free or whatever. Yeah, okay, good luck with that. Like, in the entire history of the world, people have always found and consumed substances of some kind, right? And so for you to say, oh, we just got to push treatment, and that's going to solve everything. I can tell you right now, I've tried to get people to go to treatment. I've tried to get people to abstain. Forcing people into treatment is not going to solve the problem. If they are not ready and willing to address the things that they need to address, the underlying traumas and the underlying things, it's not going to work, right? You need to be a willing participant in your wellness to achieve it, right? And so I listened to this, and I'm furiously typing away. And he's also going on about how this safe supply program of hydromorphone that was piloted, it's just being sold on the black market, and so on and so forth, which is a hilarious concept, because if safe supply is being resold, who cares? Like, it's safe supply. That's the point, right? So if someone who is seeking out fentanyl is sold a hydromorphone instead, it sounds pretty good to me, right? Like, the concept of it being resold, when you look at the statistics, fentanyl is responsible for 84% of the deaths in this province in the last year. Hydromorphone was only detected or responsible in 2%. So I don't believe it's a quantity thing. I think it's a safer option thing. And I don't know. I'm not a what's the word I'm looking for? Pharmacist? Yeah, I was going to say paramedic. That makes no sense. I'm not a pharmacist. I don't know, deeply about these substances, but the concept of a certain substance being safer and the concern of it being resold, well, it's still a safer option. So even if it's being sold to people who are seeking out something unsafe, now at least they've chosen a safer option, right? Like, that's where my head goes. So I listened to this, and I'm furiously typing away. And I should just find the message and show you, or read to you the message that I typed. But essentially, I stuck my hand up at the end of the thing, and he goes, "Oh, we're not doing an open forum. We're not going to be taking questions." Naturally, of course, because you can't answer a question like that. You just had your rhetoric to spew, and you don't want any feedback, and you don't want any questions, because you don't actually know how to answer them, because you don't know anything about this, right? So I go up to the front, and I approach him immediately, like, just as soon as it ended, stormed right up to the front. And sometimes I love being a girl, but sometimes I hate being a girl, because one thing about me is when I'm fired up, I'm gonna cry. I am full of anger, and it's gonna come out in tears, and that is exactly what happened. So I went up and said, you know what, you need, oh, look at this cat hair just flying everywhere. I said, you need to be more careful about the people that you choose to speak, because I don't want to, discredit this person's experience, the second speaker. But the only reason that, and I'm trying not to use names, so this is going to come out choppier than it did in the moment, but the only reason the first speaker's son isn't here to tell his story, but the second speaker is here today, is because the drugs that the second speaker was using 30 years ago were not poisoned, right? So I don't know if we should just give them names to make that come out easier, like John and Joe or whatever. But do you understand what I'm saying? So basically, the lady whose son that passed away 2 years ago, the reason that he is not with us today is because the drugs that he was consuming were toxic, right? No one was overdosing in those numbers 30 years ago, right? We had a few hundred deaths a year, province wide, like a very small number that was consistent for many years until fentanyl hit the scene. And now we had, 2,511 deaths in this province last year. There's been over 14,000 people since the crisis was declared that have passed of overdoses as a result of this toxic and poisoned drug crisis. So for this lady to stand up here and condemn harm reduction and say that, she made it out, so could anybody else, and a 1-year treatment program will fix everything. Well, your methamphetamines or your crack cocaine that you were consuming 30 years ago was not laced with fentanyl. Today, almost everything is laced with fentanyl. So you're getting hooked on drugs that you never even intended to do. And you are at a much higher risk of overdosing, so much so that there's entire kits distributed all over to prevent it. So it just seems very naive to me, and it seems very like blindsided to be spewing this rhetoric of like treatment and condemn harm reduction, when it's, as in the famous words of my good friend Guy Falicella, I'm going to mess it up, but he always says, it shouldn't be one or the other, it should be both. Right. And that's just it, is that in order to help in this crisis, and in order to keep people safe, we need a continuum of care. We need everything. And so this is my opinion on how to solve the drug crisis. And once again, this is going to piss a lot of people off, but I'm going to say it. So in my opinion, I think all drugs should be legalized. And I mean sold in stores just the way cannabis is, just the way alcohol is, because nothing is more lethal than the other. They're all different ways of harming yourself. There can be an argument made that cannabis is natural, or what have you, and that it doesn't harm most people. But obviously from my story, it was not great for me. Maybe not harmful in the same sense that alcohol poisons your liver, and that, I would say some of the more illicit substances like methamphetamines and crack cocaine and fentanyl and heroin and such, you can see physical and mental sometimes changes in people as a result of consuming those substances. But at the end of the day, we as people, I think, need autonomy to make choices about what we put in our bodies and about what we consume. There's fatty foods out there, and there's candy and sugar and coffee and alcohol and cannabis and all these things that we can make choices to consume. But for some reason, the government at some point says, now the line stops here, and past this point you can't. But the thing is, history shows us that in doing that, we actually make it much more unsafe for people, because, in the time of Prohibition, the amount of alcohol-related deaths went up massively. People were dying from consuming toxic alcohol because alcohol was being made in Joe Blow's basement suite, and there was no way to tell what percentage it was, and people were poisoning their brains and poisoning their bodies. So the amount of alcohol consumption in society, I don't believe dropped significantly at all. I think in the beginning they say it did a bit, and then it went up much higher. And ultimately they repealed Prohibition because they realized it was doing more harm than good, right? And same with cannabis. Like for many years, cannabis was illegal. And then, people were consuming it anyways because prohibiting something doesn't make it any less popular to consume. And the thing with cannabis, and the reason that I will lead towards safe supply, is if you recall in the 90s and the early 2000s, how popular were grow ops? Like, I don't know where you're listening from. Probably like the four of you are pretty close to me. But, cannabis and grow operations, as they were, grow ops, were everywhere. And with that meant a lot of crime, right? Because there was this battle for territory, and there was gangs involved, and there was shootings, and there was grow rips, and there was robberies, and there was a ton of crime that came along with the production of cannabis in our communities. And since then, I would say, since legalizing cannabis and certain people are allowed to, or everyone is allowed to grow a certain amount of plants and such, and you can walk to the store and buy cannabis. And for sure, there's still some black market cannabis, but I would say black market cannabis now is like some farmer growing a few plants and giving some out for a little bit cheaper than the government store or whatever. Like it's not the same. I don't know, maybe I'm out of touch with the gang culture, but I don't think they have a big stronghold in the cannabis industry anymore, right? Like I think the cartels had to move on to different things because with it legalized and the supply and demand, it's simple. Like it's available everywhere, so there is no reason anymore for there to be such a black market demand for it. So with that has, I would say, become a huge reduction in crime in terms of that category, right? um, you're not seeing the robberies, you're not seeing the gun violence, and you are seeing it for other things, right? But I don't think any of it is pertaining to cannabis anymore, right? So for that reason, I believe if we went with safe supply, now all the drugs are legal, but it's all being made in government laboratories, right? So you can get your lab created methamphetamines and your crack cocaine and your whatever you want to get, and it's made in government laboratories so that we know it's safe. Do I think that's going to make people want to use drugs more? Now, I've heard mixed reviews because I've been throwing this theory around at everyone that will listen. And I have heard from some people who maybe used to recreationally use cocaine that they would be more inclined to use cocaine if they knew it was safe. Uh, I don't know. For me personally, a store full of drugs, I just went into the liquor store and bought my non-alcoholic mm, warm Guinness. And, you know, seeing all the alcohol didn't make me want to buy the alcohol. Like I knew what I was going in to get, and that's it. Much like the cannabis stores. Like, yes, I have consumed some cannabis since it's been legal, but I also consumed cannabis when it wasn't legal. I did it in high school and it was not legal at the time, right? So, and the frequency and severity or duration or whatever you want to call it with which I consume cannabis has been consistent from when it was illegal to when it's been legal. So it didn't convince me or make me want to consume more of it or to consume it more often or anything. Like it didn't change my cravings for cannabis in any way. I've never had a craving for cannabis in my life. But yeah, so in my opinion, having a store with safe supply would not make more people want to use it. I think it would just make it safer for the people that already choose to use it. And then now getting to the less angering part of my plan for most people. So once we've created these government regulated safe drugs for people to go buy in a store safely, we will tax them like we tax alcohol and like we tax, cannabis and all the things. Now, in my plan, all the taxes from all the substances will be solely dedicated to recovery, treatment, and mental health services. So that is how we would get a continuum of care. Now people have harm reduction, they have safer options to consume their substances should they choose to consume them. And beyond that, they have carte blanche access to recovery, treatment, any form of care that they would like, whether it be a 12-step or a smart recovery or a whatever it may be, have so many treatment beds available, have so many programs available, regulate all that so you're not sending people to basically trap houses. Because definitely when I sent people to recovery from jail, a lot of them would come back saying that, it was basically just a drug den. But hopefully they're more regulated now. So yeah, I think if you have the substances available, you have them safe, and then you funnel the money made off the substances into programming to help people get off them should they choose to, then you're giving people the autonomy to do what they want with their bodies just like everyone else does. And the biggest thing there to me is having free mental health supports, right? We have free healthcare. I think we need free mental health. I think so many people would not choose to use substances if they had access to counseling and supports. I've talked about this. I think I talked about this on the last episode in the jail and stuff that, similarly to the jail where we get, 95% of the people don't get access to mental health supports because the 5% of the people who shouldn't even be there, who are incarcerated but severely, mentally ill, they are using up all the resources. And I think it's very similar in society where we have to get to such a breaking point where it becomes, severe and it becomes problematic and whatever to get the attention, to get the help or whatever. But I think so many people could benefit from just regular counseling and or support groups or what have you. And I think the availability of that is not what it should be, right? So in my perfect world plan, that's what I would like to see is a safe supply program. I don't judge anyone who uses substances. I choose to keep my boundaries. So for me, like all this being said and having this super lenient view on substances and consumption and stuff, I don't spend time really with people who consume substances. I have a couple friends who maybe smoke weed more regularly or whatever, but aside from that, like I've tried to date people who did whatever recreationally and I can't deal with it. Like it's not for me. Um, Most people who say they use this or that once in a while, it usually turns out to be a lot more often than that. A lot of my friends are sober nowadays. Like they just, some of my best, like Scully's one of my best friends, him and his partner don't consume alcohol there or anything actually. A lot of my friends are trending towards sobriety. And I think in general, sobriety is trending a lot in, in society because I think a lot of people are seeing the harms of alcohol. And I think for a long time, and especially, a few years ago and during COVID, the popularity of alcohol and the like normalcy of the sweaters and the if you're reading this bring me wine on the socks and the sweatshirts with like the rosé all day and like the alcohol related clothing and cups and all these things were so popular for a bit. Like it was really normalizing. And actually, Guy Felicello's wife is really the one who opened my eyes to this. Brianne is her name, and she does a lot of speaking on like alcoholism and how society like makes us think it's okay to be like the drunk soccer mom or like what I mean, picking your kids up from soccer, having a glass of wine or bringing it to the game or whatever. And this is no shade to anyone that consumes alcohol in this way, but it's just something that I've noticed, you know what I mean, is that it was really popular a few years ago to be very out there with your alcohol consumption and just normalize it, right? And now I don't know what made the change, but I think maybe the younger generation is enjoying life without alcohol and giving permission to those of us who grew up with it so heavily to try life without it. But I'm seeing a huge trend towards like health products and you've got Bevies in Port Coquitlam that's like was like one of the first non-alcoholic shops or whatever to open up. Like they're basically like a liquor store, but for non-alcoholic options, which is super cool. And I'm seeing more like I had a couple breweries that were serving non-alcoholic beers even on tap. Tin House did one over the summer. Shout out to them. I think I was the only person who drank it, but I drank it. It was great. I would go for a bike ride and have a non-alcoholic beer there. And yeah, there's just a lot more options in terms of not drinking, and there's a lot more people who are recovering out loud or talking about their journeys without alcohol and whatnot. And I love to see it. And I think for me, like I don't know if it's going to be a forever thing. Like it might be a until tomorrow thing. I don't know, but I have enjoyed this year long break for sure. And I have enjoyed seeing a lot of people in my life that are also, choosing sobriety. And yeah, I've been feeling good about it and I've been enjoying it. And I think there's so many other stories about substances. And I think this will be kind of the tip of the iceberg, because a lot of the people that I want to talk to have a history of substance use in some way. And I would love to, talk to them about their experiences. But I kind of just wanted to get all my ideas and thoughts out there first. And just touch back in with the 5 or 6 of you that, that might listen, and say cheers to a year without alcohol. And that's how I've been feeding my good wolf this last year, folks. I'm getting hot. I've yapped for a long time. So I'm going to let you go. And we'll hope to see you again soon. I won't make you wait so long for the next one. But keep feeding your good wolf, my friends. I appreciate you.